Hi, Heather here from Creative Kiwi. Please join me as I show the techniques that we use in making our stacked circle table runner. Basically, this runner design is a no-sew runner. Everything is created and joined in the hoop, and you can make it as short or as long as you like, based on your hoop size. I'm going to apologise up front. I love creating and stitching designs, but I'm not a video maker. So this is very much quite an amateur video showing you the techniques involved in making the table runner. This video shows how we did our 5x7 size, mainly just it's easier to fit on a video screen. And for that particular one, I did 5 hoopings, and I showed the fabric placement for all 5 of these hoopings. But as I said before, you could do 2 of them, or you could like one particular pattern which you could repeat, or you could do, if you had a certain space to fill, you could do 6 or 7 of the different patterns by repeating. We also include a plain pattern, which is the one which I've used the chakras there. Obviously you get the chakra designs, but you can certainly put your own embroidery design in there or your favourite fabric piece. At some point I'm going to use photos of my dog Buddy and make a hanger of just a couple of photos of him by printing the photos onto fabric and putting them in the centre. There's really lots of uses for this design. Now the video is designed to go with the written step-by-step instructions. There is more detail in the instructions, so please read both. Just going to get straight into it with the video, which shows what we see here in the picture, the 5 different hoopings, which is the 5 different styles of Crazy Patch design. So not only does it show the fabric placement for each of the 5 styles, but even if you're doing a plain one, you can watch the joining portion where you see how you join these pieces together in your hoop. Before we get into actually stitching the design, each style of block or pattern has a side and an end. Now, basically, no matter how many you're doing, you start with a side, even if it's your first one, and the very last file that you use is the end. That's the one that joins it all completely. Now we do the 2 layers and we pin at the edges to ensure that there is no movement in the hoop. Obviously with these designs we want them to join together nicely, so we need the hoop to be as stable as we can. So let's go. My first hooping is style A, and as you can see, you stitch the first colour onto your stabilizer, and that is the outside of your complete block. And we place our batting over that, and I use a thinnish batting. You don't want it to be too thick, and you can see it just stitches the batting to the stabilizer. Now what we do, just to make it easier at the end, and it gives you an easier cutting line, is we cut away that batting, and you can see it's slightly smaller than the actual placement line of the design. This just keeps the batting out of the seams. Now we do this for every block, so these first couple of steps, every block you do the same way. Now you place your main fabric, I call it the main, it's basically the frame, the outside fabric. You place that on the top of the hoop with the right side up and tape in place. Now I've used a dark thread here so you can see, but you should be using matching thread colours here. But as you can see, it just stitches the fabric onto the stabilizer. Once again, it's the outline. The difference being here, it then stitches the placement lines for your Crazy Patch fabrics. Now we're going to place our first piece of fabric, which is always, I call it the triangles for want of a better word, but it's just that top piece of fabric outside of the circle. Tape that in place and off to the machine, and we stitch it down. Take away from the hoop, and using some sharp scissors, just cut away that fabric. Now we're going to start placing the fabrics in the circle, and there is more detail in the step-by-step instructions, just saying which piece of fabric goes where. It's going to be the same steps every time. You're going to place your fabric, then you're going to cut away the excess. On to the next piece of fabric. Now I do show at the end, while I've done the 5x7 size, the pieces of fabric are quite small, but if you're doing a larger size, you might want to fussy cut a special bit of fabric and put it in a certain place. So I do show at the end how you can make yourself a quick template to work out, so you can put your favourite pattern piece or fabric piece in the right spot. Last piece of fabric for this side. It's the same for all of the patterns. They all follow these same steps. Now we've got all the fabric on the front of the hoop, so the next step is just going to do a zigzag of the raw edges, just so that we can keep all the fabric in place while we do all the embroidery. I just use a white thread for this. If you can't find a matching thread, you could use monofilament, the clear thread. I just use a white. It's just the same colour as I use for the satin stitch. So there we go, we've got all the fabric nice in place and zigzag down. Now it's just on to the actual embroidery. So each segment has a different piece of quilting. I have created the pattern so that you can choose to skip a colour if you don't want to quilt your bit of fabric. For my samples, I just used white thread for the whole lot, but you can use different colour quilting threads to go with your fabric, or as I say, you can skip them. As you can see there, it just goes through it's 4 lots of quilting. But I've made the quilting fairly loose as such. There's not too much in that, just so you can show off your fabrics. The next step after that is the decorative stitches over the raw edges. So I've used a blue this time throughout the design, and basically it just covers a zigzag and gives you your nice decorative stitches. Again, the files are created. If you wanted to do one red and one green, you could. It's completely up to you, really versatile. Now I won't show the design stitching every stitch in this video. This is more about the techniques than actually watching it stitch out. Okay, so we've got the front of the runner started. What we're going to do now is add the backing fabric. I've just used one piece, one colour throughout. You're going to place your backing fabric on the back of the hoop with the right side of the fabric facing upwards, because this is the back of your design, and you're going to tape it in place. The next part of the design is going to stitch on the front and the back of the runner. So there's a little bit of quilting that you're going to see on the back. So important that you change your bobbin thread at this stage so that it's matching with whatever thread you're going to use for your satin stitch. I used white, pretty simple, but yeah, if your satin stitch was red, change your bobbin to red. So we're back at the machine, and we're just going to do that next stitch, which is going to attach the backing, and as I say before, just do a little bit of quilting on the front and the back. And this is just going to help when you're joining the design. So I think it's going to start stitching now. Yeah, see, it just stitches a line around that frame, which is decorative, but also helps with the joining. Okay, so that's the front of it done. So now we take the hoop from the machine and we're going to be cutting away that excess fabric on the front and the back of the hoop. Now I try and remember to cut away the backing fabric first, otherwise it is really easy to forget because you cut away the stuff on the front and then pop it back in the machine and whoops, you've still got a backing fabric. So yeah, just remember it's the front and the back of the machine of the hoop at this point. Now you can use duck-billed scissors or fancy clippers. I just honestly find the sharpest scissors, which for me are these dressmakers scissors, work. Just whatever scissors you're using, as long as they're sharp, and you can cut away that excess. Now you're back to the machine, and the first thing we're going to do is just a zigzag of the initial raw edges. Now because this is the first design that we do, we don't need to join, but the file is split so you have a zigzag stitch and a joining stitch. So on this first one, you just stitch the next two colours. It's shown in the instructions, and that's just going to zigzag the raw edges of the design. And now for this first segment, just go straight in and it just does all the satin stitching of the entire design. Magic of video, it's done. Now the rest of the pieces are made in exactly the same way as what we've just done. We're just going to do an additional joining piece, which is in the zigzag. So if you've done this one, you can do the rest. So now we're just going to pop that piece out of the hoop and cut away the stabilizer. So just around the edges that have got the satin stitch, you can just cut close. You obviously don't want to cut the satin stitch. Now that raw edge at the top, you just actually try and cut as close as you can to the stitch line, and that's just going to help you when you're joining, because that's the piece that's going to be joined in the next segment. And see, I just get a bit closer there. Completed first segment, front and back. And we're on to the second segment. Now I haven't shown step 1 and 2, which is stitching out the placement line, adding your batting and then cutting away the excess. It's the same on every single part of this design. So this one is style B. Remember, you do not have to stitch them in this order. I've just done it this way so you can see how it works. Now the third colour of every file is stitched on your main fabric, and it gives you the fabric placement for the next steps. As with our original file, you're going to place that top, what I call triangle fabric, over the guideline and attach. Now you can use tape. If I was using a bigger hoop, I would probably tape all my fabrics, but you'll see as I go along with this one, with the 5x7, I don't mind too much. It's just a smaller piece of fabric and I don't feel that I need tape. Or maybe I'm just naughty. But as before, you cut away that excess fabric on your first fabric piece, the triangles, and then you're going to place your second fabric piece. I've tried to make it as simple as possible, so it's just placing your fabric, cutting away the excess, putting your next piece of fabric on. That's the second piece done, and we're just going to cut away the excess. You see I get a bit close there. Then we have our last fabric placement. Attach that one, and by magic cut away the fabric. Now we've got all the fabric on the front, so we're going to do just as we did last time. With a neutral thread, we're just going to zigzag all those raw inner edges just to keep the fabric in place. Then we're off to do all the different quilting styles. And I'll just reiterate, each one can be done in a different colour if you prefer, or you can skip them. Last step is just to do those decorative satin stitches. Now, I'm going to show you how I place my fabric on the back of the hoop. Probably wouldn't do it with the larger hoops, but with the smaller ones, you can see I float it underneath because I can see through my stabilizer and I can see that I'm going to catch all the pieces in. Very important, change your bobbin thread. This next step is going to stitch on the back. Now, as before, we're just going to cut away all those excess pieces of fabric on the front and the back of the hoop. Now we're back to the machine and we're just going to do that zigzag. Now we're just going to do the one colour or the one piece of zigzag, which is just those two top edges, and then we're going to stop for the first joining. So, a couple of places you've got the zigzag which stops at each side to help you with the guideline, and you've got that line stitched on the frame that you can see. Now this is going to help you match up the joins. So you can see the first piece, you can see that line and you can see the stitch lines. So we're going to match both the line to get the design central and place our original piece on top of the stitch line. You definitely want to use tape to hold the pieces in place. And you kind of visualise, you can see where the satin stitch is, so you want that to be central to where the zigzag is. You kind of visualise it. Now you could put tape over that entire edge. I myself don't like stitching over tape, so I tape outside the stitch line, but it is personal preference. If you find it easier, just tape that very little edge bit in place. But the main things you're checking here is that you've got that centre line matched and you've got stitch line matched. Now we're back at the machine. And you're going to stitch that next colour, which is just going, it's a zigzag, but it's going to join those two pieces together. And say I stop, I don't like stitching over tape. And I'm just using the little purple thing to hold everything in place, keep my fingers out of the way. It's just about got the tape. So you can see close up there, the zigzag has caught both sides of the fabric. So everything's in place and it's all caught. If, for some reason it's gone off or it's a bit wonky, you really do just need to redo that particular colour because that's the most important part. Then it's just off to complete all that satin stitch again. Same as before, we're just going to cut away that stabiliser just close to the satin stitch. but closer to the stitch line, because you can see now how that join works. So obviously this piece is the bit's going to be joined next. So the neater you have it, it's easier it is to see for the join. Number 2 done. Now you could now just put an end on that and make it a 3-piece runner. It is completely up to you. Now we're on to style C, and I've already done colour 1 and 2, which is the placement line on stabiliser. I've added my batting and cut away the excess and put my fabric piece over the top, and now we're just stitching out the placement lines on the front fabric. As before, I've put my triangle fabric over the top part, and I'm just attaching that. And you can have these different fabrics. You don't have to have the same as I have done. We've got fabric piece 1 taped down. And cut away the excess fabric. Fabric piece 2. And because I've got the 5x7 hoop, I haven't got as much room to play with fabric placement. As I said before, I do have at the end of the video a way you can make a quick template, so you could actually have your pretty fabrics in place more. I mean, I've definitely just gone crazy patch here and just used a lot of my blue and white fabric and not worried too much about the pieces of or the fabric placement on the pieces. Definitely just done it by eye. And the last piece, just cutting away that excess fabric. Back to the machine to do that initial zigzag of the raw edges. Then off to do those quilting portions. And lastly, your decorative stitches. Now we're going to change our bobbin, very good, and we're also going to add our backing fabric. And you can tape it on the back of the hoop if you prefer. So I'm just showing you what I do. So we have that backing fabric, wrong side facing the hoop, floating it underneath and just checking to see that I have covered the edges there. Remember, I've done many of these, so I do get used to it. Now we're going to attach the backing fabric and just stitch that quilting on the edges of the frame. We're off to cut away all that excess fabric off the front and the back. So I've tried to make it as easy as possible by making everything the same sequence. By the time you've done 5 of them, you'll be able to do them in your sleep. Now we're doing that initial zigzag just off the top half of the design. and then we're on to the join. Now we're doing exactly as we did before. So we're just going to get our completed parts. So there's 2 of them there. We're going to match that centre line. It's just a guideline for you. And we're going to have the stitch line on top of the stitch line in the hoop. And yeah, you visually match up those side bits. Then we're just doing that next colour which zigzags and joins the pieces together. Do a quick check that the zigzag has in fact joined both pieces. And if you're happy with that, off you go. And it's just to complete that satin stitch edge. Third piece done. Again, if you wanted to stop at this point and just make it a 4-piece table runner, then the next file you would use would be the end file. I'm going through all 5 of them just so that you've got fabric placement video for all of them, but it's completely up to you. Now we're on to part D. Again, we've done the placement line. We've added the batting and cut away the batting and just added our fabric on top of the hoop, and we've now done the placement line for style D. As I say, I'm sure you could just about do it without a video now. So the first piece of fabric is just that triangle piece at the top. And we've got our first piece of fabric. And again, this is in the instructions. So there's a guide for showing you which piece of fabric goes where. So please read through the instructions. There is some additional information that is helpful. This video is really just to show the techniques involved. You could use any fabrics for this. As I say, this is the Crazy Patch version, but you can just put one piece of fabric over that centerpiece using our chakra files or the blank files, and put any embroidery design you want, any piece of fabric. You could make a Halloween style, a Christmas style, it really is endless possibilities. And we've got the next piece of fabric. And the last piece of fabric for this side or style. Back to the machine where we do that initial zigzag of just the raw edges on the inner raw edges, and then off to do our quilting. Lastly, we do the pretty decorative stitches. Now we're going to add our backing fabric and we're going to change the bobbin to match the satin stitch edging. As I say, I used white, so very simple. And we've got that backing fabric underneath the hoop. And we're going to attach that backing and do that decorative stitching on the back. Now I've cut away the backing fabric and now we're just going to do the front again. Back to the machine. Now I missed videoing it, but I've done that zigzag stitch. I must have been getting tired at this point and forgot to press play. So now we're going to do the next join, same as before, using those guides. And you can see visually kind of working with that satin stitch, so it's central. Going to do that joining zigzag. And when you're happy with it, off we go and finish the satin stitch edging of the last side piece. Nothing new here, just cutting away that stabiliser close to the satin stitch and closer to that stitch line raw edge. Now the next bit we're going to do is the end design, and this part you could also use as a coaster. And even if you're just doing a 2 or a 3 segment piece, the last piece is always the end. So I've given you all 5 styles have an end piece. But just as before, you're going to do your placement line on the stabiliser. You're going to add your stabiliser, cut away the excess, and then put your main frame fabric over the top. It's just the same as before without the little triangular pieces at the top. We've got our placement line, fabric placement line stitching. We've got our first fabric piece. Just cut away that excess. Onto our second fabric piece. And cut away the edges. Last piece. As before, do the next colour, which just zigzags those inner raw edges. Then you're off to do your quilting and your decorative stitch, and that's the front piece done. You're going to tape your backing fabric in place on the back of the hoop, or, as I've done here, float your fabric under the hoop. Change your bobbin, and you're going to attach that backing piece and do the stitch lines on the frame. We're going to cut away that excess fabric on the front and back of the hoop. As before, we're just going to do that zigzag along the top edge. Now, if you were making a coaster, you would just continue on and finish the coaster. We're doing this as the final joining piece, so just as before, we're going to put our completed pieces against the current design and tape it in place. And back to that final join. Last time, once you're happy with that join, get the machine going again to do that final satin stitch edge. And that's your table runner done. So the final step for your placemat, because there's no sewing needed, is just to remove the stabiliser. Now, if you're just doing like a wall hanging, you can just do as I have here, which is using hot water and Q-tips. Just remove the stabiliser or wash away the stabiliser from the edges. If you're using this as a placemat, the best idea would be to put it in the wash, and that way you remove all traces of the stabiliser, and there's no worry that if you spill something on it, that will shrivel up. Once you've put it through a wash, give it an iron, and it comes back to new. As I say, wall hangings, I just tend to do this. They're not likely to get moisture near them. I just thought I'd show you a way you can make a fabric template. As I say, my 5x7 size, the pieces are quite small, but for the bigger hoops, you might want to use a really special piece of fabric. So what I've done is I wanted that inner circle to have a piece of fabric in there, fussy cut a piece of fabric. So I've just stitched out colour 3 onto a piece of cutaway. And I'm just going to cut away that piece that I want. And that way you can then place that over the fabric to find the piece you want. So there you go, I wanted that flower like that. Now you could use a fabric marker to mark out that area, or you can see what I've done. I've just, because it's only such a small piece, I've just cut around it. Just added a seam allowance just to make it easier for cutting the fabric later, cutting away the fabric later. And that just gives you a template that you can use to add your piece of fabric to the file. So here's the finished sample. So we've obviously got the 5 segment crazy patch one that we've just stitched. The one at the top is actually a hanger, even though we've got it placed that way in the photo, and that's just of all the chakras. Now that set is included in the design set, but it's just to show you that you can use different colours. Obviously I've got the 7 different colour fabrics in that one, use 7 different colours satin stitch on the edge, but you could put any design in the centre, anything that you like. Now the next one we've got is from Dorina, who just was the most fantastic sewer, and she's just stitched her one out 8x12 size in Christmassy fabrics with the included coasters. So you can see it makes quite a nice set, and you could use any colours, any theme, very versatile. I really hope you enjoy the design, and please share it with us. So much for watching.